Hello and welcome aboard to the Snoozy Voyager. Imagine a monument so impossibly vast that it has bewildered humanity for 45 centuries. A structure so precise that its sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, built by a civilization that supposedly had no wheels, no iron tools, and no written blueprints. For thousands of years, this geometric perfection has stood in the desert, defying time, weather, and our understanding of ancient engineering. The Great Pyramid of Giza weighs approximately 6 million tons, contains over 2 million limestone blocks, and was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. And yet, we still cannot definitively answer one simple question. Exactly how did they build it? Tonight, we will explore the most enduring mystery in architectural history. We will meet the workers who dragged these stones across the sand, the engineers who designed impossible ramps, and the pharaohs who demanded immortality in geometric form. We will examine the wild theories, from ancient aliens to lost advanced civilizations, and compare them to the actual archaeological evidence. This is a story of human ambition on a scale so staggering it borders on madness, of a society that mobilized an entire nation to construct a tomb, and of the surprisingly ordinary people who achieved the extraordinary. But before we begin our ascent, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight, so I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to a time of copper chisels, palm fibre rope, and the blinding Egyptian sun beating down on the Giza Plateau. You're standing on a limestone plateau on the western bank of the Nile River in the year 2600 BCE. The land around you is not the barren, tourist-filled desert of the modern era. This is a living, working landscape at the edge of an agricultural paradise. To the east, beyond the green ribbon of the Nile Valley, you can see fields of barley and wheat stretching to the horizon, irrigated by the annual flood. Behind you to the west lies the endless desert, the realm of the dead where the sun sets each evening. You're here because the previous pharaoh Sneferu has just died, and his son Khufu has ascended to the throne with a vision more ambitious than any ruler before him. The plateau beneath your feet is solid limestone, a gift from an ancient sea that covered this land millions of years ago. The rock is relatively soft, which will prove to be both a blessing and a challenge in the years to come. The surface is uneven, covered with outcroppings and natural formations that will need to be levelled before any construction can begin. The air is dry and hot, carrying the scent of sun-baked stone and the distant smell of the Nile's fertile mud. This place has been chosen for a reason. It sits high above the floodplain, safe from the annual inundation, and it offers a clear view across the valley. More importantly, it lies on the western bank, the side where the sun dies each day, making it the traditional realm of the dead. You can see workers already arriving, not in chains as slaves, but as citizens fulfilling their obligation to the divine king. They come from villages up and down the Nile, carrying their own tools and bedrolls, ready to spend the flood season working on something that will outlast them by thousands of years. The scale of what is about to happen here has not yet become clear. The plateau looks vast and empty, and it is difficult to imagine that within your lifetime it will be transformed into a complex of pyramids, temples, causeways, and workers' villages that will employ tens of thousands of people. For now, it is simply a flat expanse of rock under an impossibly blue sky. Think about that for a moment. You're witnessing the blank canvas before the masterpiece. This empty plateau will soon become the most famous construction site in human history, and you will be part of it. The work has not yet begun, but the vision has already been set. Khufu does not want a modest tomb. He wants a monument that will declare his divinity to the heavens and ensure his eternal life in the afterlife. He wants a structure so massive, so perfect in its geometry, that it will inspire awe for millennia. And he has chosen this spot, this windswept limestone plateau on the edge of the desert, to make it happen. The surveyors have already begun their work. You can see them moving across the plateau with their measuring ropes and plumb bobs, establishing the precise orientation and dimensions of the base. They are not working from detailed blueprints as a modern architect would. Instead, they work from principles, from experience gained in the construction of earlier pyramids, and from the divine guidance they believe flows through the pharaoh himself. The site is being sanctified, blessed by priests who burn incense and chant prayers to ensure that the gods favour this endeavour. You stand at the beginning of something unprecedented. The empty plateau will not remain empty for long. You might reasonably ask yourself why anyone would dedicate decades of labour and unimaginable resources to constructing a geometric mountain of stone. The answer lies in the Egyptian understanding of death, which was not an ending but a transformation. The pharaoh was not merely a king but a living god, the earthly embodiment of Horus, and upon death he would join the sun god Ra on his eternal journey across the sky. But this divine transition required a properly prepared vessel and a monument that could preserve the pharaoh's body and Ka, his life force, for eternity. The pyramid shape itself was deeply symbolic, representing the primordial mound that rose from the waters of chaos at the creation of the world. To the ancient Egyptians, death was simply a doorway to another existence. But passing through that doorway successfully required careful preparation. The body needed to be preserved through mummification. The internal organs needed to be removed and stored in canopic jars. The tomb needed to be filled with everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife, including food, furniture, clothing, and magical texts. And most importantly, the tomb itself needed to be a structure so monumentally powerful that it could protect the pharaoh's remains for eternity and serve as a launching point for his journey to join the gods. The pyramid shape was not chosen arbitrarily. It represented the Ben, the sacred stone that sat atop the primordial mound at the moment of creation. The sloping sides were thought to represent the rays of the sun descending from heaven to earth, creating a permanent stairway or ramp by which the pharaoh's spirit could ascend to the sky. Every morning, when the sun rose over the eastern horizon and struck the pyramid's polished white surface, it would transform into a beacon of reflected light, a physical manifestation of the pharaoh's divine power radiating across the land. It was not just a tomb, it was a machine for achieving immortality. But here is where things get strange. The pyramid was never meant to be seen from the inside. Once the pharaoh's mummified body was placed in the burial chamber and the entrance was sealed and hidden, no living person was expected to enter ever again. The internal chambers and passages were designed for the pharaoh's spirit, not for visitors. The elaborate decorations, magical texts, and provisions were all for an audience of one. The external perfection of the pyramid, the precise geometry, the gleaming casing stones, the perfect alignment with the cardinal directions, all of this was a statement to the gods and to the Egyptian people. It declared that Khufu was powerful enough to bend nature itself to his will. Think about that for a moment. You are about to spend decades of your life building something that was designed to be sealed shut and never opened. The modern mind struggles with this concept. We build monuments to be experienced, to be entered, to be used. But the pyramid was built to be permanent, eternal, and forever closed. Its purpose was not to impress tourists or future archaeologists. Its purpose was to function as a cosmic engine that would allow a god-king to cheat death and live forever among the stars. The religious certainty behind this project is absolute. No one questions whether the pharaoh deserves this monument. No one debates whether the resources could be better spent elsewhere. The construction of the pyramid is a sacred duty, a collective national effort to ensure the cosmic order remains intact. If the pharaoh does not achieve a successful afterlife, the sun might not rise, the Nile might not flood, and chaos could consume the world. You're not just building a tomb, you're maintaining the very fabric of reality. It is like being asked to build a church, except the church weighs 6 million tons, and your salvation depends on getting the angles exactly right. The man responsible for translating Khufu's divine vision into physical reality was his cousin and vizier, Hemiunu. You can see him now, a stocky, serious man with the shaved head and simple kilt of Egyptian officialdom, standing before a limestone slab covered in measurements and calculations. He is not working with detailed architectural plans as we would understand them, for the Egyptians had no formal system of written blueprints. Instead, he works with a combination of geometric principles, practical experience from previous pyramid construction, and a deep understanding of the properties of stone. His title, Overseer of all the King's Works, means he commands the largest construction project in human history. Hemiunu is not an architect in the modern sense. He is something closer to a master craftsman, a mathematician, and a logistics genius all combined into one person. His challenges are unprecedented in scale. He must figure out how to quarry, transport and stack over 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. He must ensure that the base of the pyramid is perfectly level, despite being built on uneven bedrock. He must orient the structure so precisely that its sides align with true north to within a fraction of a degree. And he must do all of this using only copper tools, wooden sledges, and human muscle power. The calculations required are staggering. Hemiunu must determine the exact angle of the pyramid's slope. Too steep, and the structure becomes unstable and risks collapsing under its own weight. Too shallow, and the pyramid loses its symbolic power and requires even more stone. The angle he settles on is approximately 51 degrees, a slope that later architects will recognise as remarkably close to the optimal angle for structural stability. How did he arrive at this angle without calculus or computer modelling? Through a combination of practical experience from earlier pyramids, some of which failed catastrophically, and a sophisticated understanding of geometric ratios. The Egyptians worked with a system based on the seked, a unit of measurement that expressed the slope as a ratio of horizontal to vertical distance. But here is where things get truly impressive. Hemiunu must also coordinate the work of tens of thousands of labourers, ensure a steady supply of food and water to the construction site, manage the quarrying operations at multiple locations, and organise the transportation of massive stones from as far as 800 kilometres away. He's essentially running a city-state dedicated to a single purpose. He has teams of scribes who track every stone, every worker, every loaf of bread, and every jar of beer. The logistics alone would challenge a modern construction company with computers and spreadsheets. Hemiunu is doing it with papyrus scrolls and an abacus. You watch him move across the construction site, stopping to examine the fit of a casing stone, consulting with the surveyors about the alignment, discussing supply issues with the overseers. He carries an aura of absolute authority, but also of deep responsibility. If this pyramid fails, if it collapses, or if it is built incorrectly, the blame will fall on him. His reputation, his family's honour, and possibly his life depend on the success of this project. And yet, he approaches the work with a calm confidence that suggests he knows exactly what he is doing. Modern archaeologists discovered Hemiunu's tomb near the Great Pyramid, and inside was a statue of the man himself. He's depicted as heavy-set, prosperous, and dignified. His tomb's proximity to Khufu's pyramid was a great honour, a reward for his service. The inscription identifies him as the king's kinsman, and the one who carried out this monumental work. When you see Hemiunu reviewing the work, you're looking at one of the greatest engineers in human history, a man who solved problems that would not be attempted again for thousands of years. It's like watching someone invent calculus using only rocks and string, except the final exam is a 6 million ton geometric mountain that has to last for eternity. Contrary to the persistent myth popularized by ancient Greek historians, the Great Pyramid was not built by slaves. You are one of approximately 20 to 30,000 Egyptian citizens participating in a rotating national labour obligation. Think of it as an ancient form of taxation, except instead of paying money, you pay in sweat and muscle. You're a farmer from a village 200 miles south along the Nile, and you have been conscripted during the inundation season when the Nile floods and agricultural work is impossible. For the next 3 to 4 months, you will live in a workers' village near the Giza Plateau, hauling stone and building a monument to a god-king you will likely never meet face to face. The system is remarkably organised. Royal officials arrived in your village weeks ago, conducting a census and selecting able-bodied men for the work crews. Your selection is not random. The officials consider your age, your physical condition, and your family situation. Men with essential skills, like blacksmiths or potters needed in the village, are often exempt. Young men in their prime working years are preferred, but older experienced workers are valued for their knowledge and steadiness. You are given time to prepare, to make arrangements for your farm and family, and to gather your personal belongings for the journey north. The journey to Giza is itself an adventure. You and the other men from your village travel together, walking along the Nile or, during the flood season, taking boats provided by the government. The trip takes several days, and along the way, you join up with other groups from other villages, forming a river of workers flowing toward the pyramid site. The officials organise you into crews, each crew consisting of around 2,000 men, and each crew is divided into smaller gangs of about 20 workers. Your gang is given a name, something like the Enduring Gang or the Strong Gang, and you will work, eat, and sleep with these men for the next few months. These gang names are not just administrative labels. They become sources of pride and friendly competition. When you arrive at Giza, you are struck by the sheer scale of the operation. This is not just a construction site, it is a temporary city, complete with housing, food distribution centres, medical facilities, and administrative buildings. You are assigned to a barracks and given your work assignment. The work is hard, brutally hard, but it is not the hopeless, desperate labour of slavery. You are fed well, better than you eat at home. You receive medical care if you're injured. You're part of a national effort, a sacred duty that every Egyptian understands and respects. When your 3-month rotation is complete, you will return home with stories to tell, with the knowledge that you contributed to something eternal. Think about that for a moment. This is a system of mass mobilization on a scale not seen again until the Industrial Age. The pharaoh is effectively drafting a significant portion of the nation's workforce for a single project. And yet, the system works because it is based on reciprocity. You provide your labour during the season when you cannot farm anyway. In return, the state feeds you, houses you, and treats you with a level of care that acknowledges your value. You're not a slave. You're a citizen performing your duty to the divine king who ensures that the Nile floods each year and that the sun rises each morning. Modern excavations of the workers' cemetery near the pyramids have revealed fascinating details about these men. Their bones show the wear and tear of heavy labour, evidence of healed fractures and arthritis. But they also show signs of medical care, of injuries that were treated and healed. The tombs, while simple compared to those of the elite, were built with care and contain provisions for the afterlife. These were not the graves of slaves tossed into unmarked pits. These were the graves of workers who are honoured for their service. It is like being drafted for a massive national project, except instead of building highways, you're building a monument that will still be standing 45 centuries later, and historians will argue about whether you were forced to do it or whether you actually believed in the cause. Spoiler, you believed. You have been assigned a space in one of the long, narrow workers' barracks built specifically for this project. These are not the grim, prison-like quarters you might imagine, but functional, surprisingly well-organised dormitories. The barracks are made of mud brick with flat roofs, and they house dozens of men in communal sleeping arrangements. You share your space with other farmers and labourers from your region, which helps ease the loneliness of being away from home. The village itself is a small city, complete with bakeries that produce thousands of loaves daily, breweries that supply the workers with beer, which is safer to drink than water, and even a medical facility where workers with injuries can receive treatment. The layout of the workers' village reveals the sophisticated organisation behind the pyramid project. The settlement is divided into different sections based on function and hierarchy. The skilled craftsmen, the stonemasons, carpenters and metal workers live in slightly better quarters closer to the construction site. The unskilled labourers like you live in the larger communal barracks a bit further away. The overseers and administrators have small private dwellings, still modest by modern standards, but offering some privacy and comfort. The entire village is surrounded by a low wall, not to keep you prisoner, but to define the boundaries of the settlement and provide some protection from windblown sand. Your sleeping area is a simple reed mat on a raised mud brick platform. You have a small storage area where you keep your personal belongings, a spare kilt, a wooden comb, Perhaps a small amulet of your first assignment is at the quarry, located directly south of the pyramid site. This is where the bulk of the pyramid's core stones are being cut from the living bedrock. The work is brutally physical and requires a precision that surprises you. The quarry masters have marked out a grid on the limestone surface, defining the dimensions of each block, typically about 1 metre wide, 1 metre high, and 2 to 3 metres long, weighing approximately 2.5 tons. Your job is to help cut these blocks free from the earth, using only copper chisels, wooden wedges, and stone hammers. It is like trying to dismantle a mountain using kitchen utensils, and it will take you and your team several days to extract a single block. The quarry itself is a chaotic landscape of stepped terraces, each level representing a layer of stone that has been removed. The sound is overwhelming, a constant rhythmic hammering as dozens of teams work simultaneously, punctuated by the sharp crack of stone splitting and the shouts of overseers coordinating the work. The air is thick with limestone dust that coats everything, turning your skin white and making you cough with every breath. The sun beats down mercilessly, reflecting off the pale stone and creating a blinding glare that makes your eyes water. There is no shade here, no relief from the heat that radiates up from the rock beneath your feet. You quickly learn that quarrying is not just mindless hammering. There is a technique, a rhythm that must be followed. The quarry master, a man with decades of experience, shows you how to read the stone. Limestone has natural layers, bedding planes created over millions of years as sediment accumulated on an ancient seafloor. If you can identify these planes, you can work with the stone's natural weaknesses rather than fighting against its strength. The trick is to cut along these horizontal layers, making the extraction easier. Fighting against the grain, cutting vertically through multiple layers, is exponentially harder and more likely to result in a fractured, unusable block. Your gang works as a unit. 4 men work on each side of the marked block, hammering copper chisels into the stone to create a channel, a trench about 20 centimetres wide that will eventually surround the entire perimeter. The work is relentless and monotonous. Strike the chisel. Move it a finger's width over. Strike again. Repeat 10,000 times. Your hands blister, then callous, then blister again. Your shoulders ache from the repetitive motion. The ringing in your ears from the constant hammering never quite fades, even when you return to the barracks at night. But here is where things get interesting. Every few hours, the overseer calls for a tool change. The copper chisels, which started the day sharp and bright, have become blunt and mushroomed from the constant pounding. They must be taken to the metal workers who have set up a forge at the edge of the quarry. The smiths reheat the copper, reshape the cutting edge, and return them to service. This cycle repeats throughout the day. The Egyptians understood that copper was soft, that it dulled quickly, but they also knew how to manage this limitation through constant maintenance. It is like trying to carve a turkey with a butter knife, except you have a blacksmith standing by to resharpen your knife every 20 minutes, and the turkey weighs as much as a small car. As the channels around your block grow deeper, reaching 30 or 40 centimetres into the stone, the work becomes more awkward. You are now hammering into a narrow trench, unable to get good leverage, working in cramped positions that make your back scream in protest. The limestone chips and dust pile up around you, and workers with baskets constantly clear away the debris so it does not impede your progress. You begin to understand why each block takes so long to extract. This is not fast work. This is patient, methodical, back-breaking labour that cannot be rushed. The quarry masters estimate that a skilled gang can extract 1 block every 3 to 5 days. When you multiply that by 2 million blocks, you begin to understand why the pyramid will take decades to complete. You are handed a copper chisel, a tool that will become as familiar to you as your own hand over the coming months. Copper, the primary metal available to the ancient Egyptians, is laughably soft by modern standards. It bends, it dulls, and it cannot cut through hard granite. But for the softer limestone that makes up most of the pyramid, copper is just barely adequate. You learn to strike the chisel at precise angles, creating a channel around the perimeter of a marked stone block. The work is rhythmic, almost meditative, as you and a dozen other men hammer away in unison, creating a trench that slowly deepens. The dust is everywhere, filling your lungs, coating your skin, turning your sweat into a paste of powdered limestone. The chisel itself is a simple tool, almost elegant in its functionality. It is about 20 centimetres long, forged from relatively pure copper, with a flat, beveled cutting edge on one end and a slightly mushroomed head on the other where your stone hammer will strike. The weight feels right in your hand, heavy enough to have momentum when you drive it into the stone, light enough that you can work with it for hours without your arm giving out. The copper has a reddish gold colour when new, but it quickly darkens with use, stained by the limestone dust and oxidation. You discover that there is a proper technique to using the chisel, and the experienced workers are happy to teach you because your efficiency affects the entire gang's productivity. You do not swing the hammer wildly at the chisel. Instead, you hold the chisel firmly at a slight angle, about 15 degrees from vertical, pressing the cutting edge against the stone. Then you strike the back of the chisel with controlled, measured blows from your stone hammer. The goal is not to chip away large pieces of limestone, which would be inefficient and could fracture the block you are trying to free. Instead, you are pulverizing the stone along a narrow line, turning it into powder and small chips that can be easily cleared away. The rhythm of the work becomes almost hypnotic. Strike, shift, strike, shift, strike, shift. The sound of dozens of hammers striking dozens of chisels creates a steady percussion that echoes across the quarry. Sometimes the overseer will start a work chant, and the entire gang will hammer in time with his voice, turning the labour into something approaching music. The chant serves a practical purpose, coordinating your efforts so that you're not getting in each other's way, and helping you maintain a steady pace that prevents exhaustion. But here is the frustrating part. Copper dulls quickly. You can actually feel it happen. When the chisel is freshly sharpened, it bites into the limestone with satisfying efficiency. Each strike removes a visible amount of stone, but after an hour or two of constant work, the edge becomes rounded and blunt. Now each strike removes less material, and you have to work harder to achieve the same result. The dulling is inevitable, a consequence of trying to cut stone with a metal that is only marginally harder than the material you are working with. It is like trying to slice bread with a spoon. Eventually you will manage it, but you are going to ruin a lot of spoons in the process. This is why the metal workers at the forge are so important. Every few hours, you walk over to the forge area with a basket full of blunted chisels. The smiths have a charcoal fire burning hot enough to make the copper glow red. They reheat each chisel, hammer the mushroomed head back into shape, and reshape the cutting edge on a stone anvil. Within minutes, your chisel is returned to you, sharp and ready for another few hours of work. This constant cycle of dulling and resharpening is one of the hidden costs of pyramid construction. The Egyptians must have gone through thousands of copper chisels during the decades of construction, each one requiring copper ore, fuel for smelting, and skilled labour to forge and maintain. Think about that for a moment. The pyramid is not just a monument of stone. It is also a monument to resource management, to the ability of a civilization to supply, maintain, and coordinate thousands of tools across decades of continuous work. Your simple copper chisel represents a supply chain that stretches from copper mines in the Sinai Peninsula to smelting workshops to the forge in the quarry, to your hand and back again in an endless cycle. It is like building a skyscraper using only hand tools, except the hand tools keep breaking and you have to fix them yourself between every floor. Once the trenches around a block have been cut deep enough, the quarry master introduces you to one of the cleverest techniques in the Egyptian engineering arsenal, the wooden wedge method. Workers drive dry wooden wedges into the channels you have carved. Then, and this is the ingenious part, you pour water over the wedges. Wood, when wet, expands with surprising force. Over the course of several hours, you can actually hear the stone groaning and cracking as the swelling wedges exert thousands of pounds of pressure into the cuts. Eventually, with a sharp crack that echoes across the quarry, the block breaks free from the bedrock. It is immensely satisfying, this moment when nature and human ingenuity combine to move a mountain one block at a time. The wedges themselves are carved from hardwoods, probably acacia or sycamore, shaped into thick tapered pegs about 20 centimetres long and 5 centimetres wide at the thick end. The quarry master inspects each wedge carefully before use, looking for cracks or weak grain that might cause the wedge to split rather than expand when wetted. The wedges must be absolutely dry when they are inserted, which means they are stored in a covered area away from any moisture. A damp wedge will not expand nearly as much when water is added, and the technique will fail. Once your gang has cut the channels around a block to a depth of 30 or 40 centimetres, and most importantly, once you have cut a horizontal channel underneath the block to separate it from the bedrock below, the quarry master marks the positions for the wedges. They are spaced evenly along the channels, typically about 10 to 15 centimetres apart. You use a small copper chisel to carefully carve wedge-shaped slots, wider at the top and narrower at the bottom, that will grip the wooden wedges tightly as they expand. This part of the work requires precision. If the slots are too loose, the expanding wedges will simply push themselves out rather than exerting pressure on the stone. If the slots are too tight, you will not be able to insert the wedges at all. Then comes the moment of truth. The wedges are driven into their slots with wooden mallets, tapped firmly into place until they are seated as deeply as possible. You count 20 wedges around the perimeter of your block, each one a potential point of pressure that will, if everything goes according to plan, convince this 2.5-ton piece of stone to separate from the bedrock that has held it for millions of years. The quarry master gives the signal, and workers with large ceramic jars begin pouring water over the wedges, soaking them thoroughly. The water darkens the wood and immediately begins to be absorbed into the fibres. At first, nothing happens. You wait, watching the wedges intently for any sign of movement. The sun continues its journey across the sky. You eat your midday meal of bread and onions, drink your ration of beer, and return to watch the wedges. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, you begin to hear it. A faint creaking sound, like someone walking on an old wooden floor. The sound grows gradually louder, a groaning deep within the stone itself as the swelling wedges exert their pressure against the walls of the limestone channels. More water is poured over the wedges to keep them saturated and encourage maximum expansion. The tension builds, the groaning intensifies, and then, with a sudden sharp crack like a thunderclap, the block breaks free. The sound is so loud and unexpected that several workers jump in surprise. The limestone block, now separated from the bedrock on all sides and underneath, shifts slightly, settling into its freedom. A ragged cheer goes up from your gang. You have successfully extracted a block. The quarry master nods in approval, already moving on to mark out the next block, but you and your fellow workers take a moment to appreciate what you have just accomplished. Think about that for a moment. You have just used water and wood to break stone. No explosives, no power tools, no hydraulic equipment, just an understanding of how materials behave, how wood expands when wet, and how stone has natural stress points that can be exploited. It is an elegant solution to an enormous problem, the kind of innovation that makes you realize the ancient Egyptians were not primitive people, struggling with inadequate technology. They were brilliant engineers working with the materials available to them and finding clever solutions that worked. It is like watching someone hack together a working computer, using only vacuum tubes and telegraph wire, except the computer weighs more than an elephant and you're going to need 2 million of them. Now that the block has been freed, it must be moved to the construction site. This is where the real backbreaking labour begins. The Egyptians have no wheels suitable for moving such heavy loads, so instead they use wooden sledges, which are essentially large, flat sleds. The limestone block is levered onto the sledge using wooden poles, a process that requires perfect timing and coordination to avoid crushed fingers and toes. Then thick ropes made from twisted palm fibres are attached to the front of the sledge. You and 20 other men take hold of these ropes, and on the count of the overseer, you pull. The sledge does not move. You pull again, harder this time, your feet digging into the sand for leverage. Slowly, grudgingly, the sledge begins to slide forward. The sledge itself is a masterpiece of simple engineering. It is constructed from thick planks of wood, probably imported cedar from Lebanon since Egypt has no large native trees, lashed together with rope to create a flat platform. The front of the sledge curves upward slightly like the front of a sled to help it slide over uneven ground. The underside is smooth and has been coated with animal fat or oil to reduce friction. The entire structure is remarkably sturdy, capable of bearing loads many times heavier than the block you're moving, because it must survive being dragged across rough terrain day after day for years. Loading the block onto the sledge is a delicate operation that requires the coordination of your entire gang. Long wooden poles, essentially large levers, are inserted into the channel underneath the block. The quarry master positions men on both sides of the block, and on his command, everyone lifts in unison. The goal is not to lift the block high, just enough to slip wooden rollers underneath it. These rollers are short lengths of cylindrical logs that allow the block to be moved more easily than dragging it directly across the stone. Once the rollers are in place, the block is carefully manoeuvred onto the waiting sledge, a process that involves much shouting, many adjustments, and the occasional near disaster when the block shifts unexpectedly. With the block finally secured on the sledge, the ropes are attached. These are not delicate cords, but massive cables, each one as thick as your arm, woven from thousands of individual palm fibres. The rope-making industry in ancient Egypt must have been enormous, churning out mile after mile of cordage to supply the pyramid construction. The ropes are attached to wooden pegs driven into the front of the sledge, and they spread out like the spokes of a wheel, allowing 20 or more men to pull simultaneously without getting in each other's way. You take your position in the rope gang, gripping the rough fibre with both hands. The overseer raises his hand and you brace yourself. He drops his hand and shouts the command. You pull. Every muscle in your body engages. Your legs drive against the ground, your back strains, your arms burn with effort. For a long, terrible moment nothing happens. The sledge sits there mocking your efforts, refusing to acknowledge that 20 men are trying to move it. You pull harder, grunting with exertion, your feet slipping slightly in the sand, and then, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. The sledge moves. Not much, perhaps a few centimetres, but it moves. Encouraged, the gang pulls again, and this time the movement is more pronounced. The sledge slides forward with a grinding sound of wood against sand. The overseer begins a rhythmic chant, and you pull in time with his voice. Pull, step, pull, step, pull, step. The sledge is moving now at a steady, if painfully slow, pace. You quickly fall into the rhythm, learning to time your pulls so that you're not fighting against the sledge's inertia, but working with its momentum. The work is exhausting in a way that nothing in your previous life has prepared you for. You've spent your life doing agricultural labour, which is certainly hard work, but this is different. This is maximum effort sustained over hours. Your entire world narrows to the rope in your hands, the ground beneath your feet, and the voice of the overseer marking the rhythm. Sweat pours off you, soaking your kilt and dripping onto the sand. Your hands, already calloused from the chisel work, develop new blisters from the rope. Your shoulders feel like they are being pulled from their sockets. Think about that for a moment. You're hauling a stone that weighs as much as a modern car, using only rope and human muscle power, across hundreds of meters of desert. No engines, no machinery, no technology beyond wood and fibre. And you will do this not once, but thousands of times over the coming months. It is like being asked to push your car to work every day. Except you do not have a car, you have a block of stone, and your office is at the top of a mountain that does not exist yet. So you're also building the mountain as you go. One of the most important jobs on the pyramid construction site belongs to a man you initially dismiss as unimportant, the water carrier. He walks ahead of the sledge teams with a large ceramic jug, pouring water onto the sand in the path of the sledge. You assume this is to settle the dust, but you quickly learn it serves a far more critical function. Wet sand, counterintuitively, creates less friction than dry sand. Modern experiments have confirmed what the ancient Egyptians discovered through trial and error. Dampening the sand reduces the force needed to pull a heavy sledge by nearly half. That man with the water jug is not just keeping you comfortable, he is making the impossible possible. Without him, you would quite literally be unable to move the stones. The physics behind this technique are fascinating, though the ancient Egyptians did not understand the science in those terms. Dry sand is a collection of countless individual grains that shift and move independently under pressure. When you try to pull a heavy sledge across dry sand, the runners sink into the surface, and the sand grains pile up in front of the sledge, creating a small hill that you must constantly pull over. It is like trying to wade through waist-deep powder snow. Every step requires enormous effort because you're not just moving forward, you're also fighting against the material that keeps collapsing around you. But when you add just the right amount of water to sand, something remarkable happens. The water acts as a binding agent, creating capillary bridges between individual sand grains. These tiny water bridges hold the grains together, transforming the loose, shifty surface into something firmer and more stable. The sledge runners no longer sink as deeply, and the sand no longer piles up in front of the sledge. The result is a dramatic reduction in friction, making the sledge perhaps twice as easy to pull. It is the difference between barely being able to move the load at all and being able to move it with sustainable, if still difficult, effort. The water carrier's job requires surprising skill and judgment. Too little water, and the sand remains dry and difficult. Too much water, and the sand becomes muddy and the sledge begins to stick and sink. The optimal moisture content is probably around 5 to 10%, just enough to darken the sand and make it firm without turning it to mud. The water carrier learns to read the conditions, to adjust his pouring based on the ambient temperature, the time of day, and the specific characteristics of the sand in different areas. On hot days, he must make more frequent passes because the water evaporates quickly. On cooler mornings, less water is needed. You begin to appreciate the water carrier as you watch him work ahead of your team. He's not just pouring randomly, he is creating a carefully dampened path, a temporary roadway that will last just long enough for your sledge to pass over it. Behind you, the sand dries out again, ready to be re-dampened when the next sledge comes through. The efficiency of the system is remarkable. The water is brought up from the Nile in a constant stream of carriers, each one with a large ceramic jar balanced on their shoulder. They pour their water onto the path, then return to the river to refill. It is a human supply chain, moving thousands of gallons of water each day to keep the sand damp and the sledges moving. Modern archaeologists conducting experiments have confirmed this technique's effectiveness. In tests conducted in Egypt, teams pulling a sledge across dry sand required approximately twice as much force as teams pulling the same sledge across moistened sand. When you consider that some of the stones being moved weigh 50 tons or more, that reduction in friction is the difference between a task that requires 100 men and a task that requires only 50. Multiply that efficiency across millions of blocks and thousands of workers, and the water carrier's contribution becomes absolutely critical to the project's success. But here is the interesting part. We know the ancient Egyptians used this technique because they depicted it in their art. A famous wall painting from the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep shows a colossal statue being moved on a sledge, and prominently featured in the image is a man standing on the statue's base, pouring liquid, almost certainly water, onto the sand in front of the sledge. The ancient artists considered this detail important enough to include in their documentation of the event, which suggests they understood it was a crucial part of the process. Think about that for a moment. You are witnessing an elegant solution to a physics problem that the ancient Egyptians solved through observation and experimentation. They did not have the mathematics to explain why wet sand creates less friction than dry sand, but they did not need the mathematics. They just needed to notice that sledges moved more easily on damp sand, and to systematize that observation into a technique that could be applied across the entire construction site. It is like discovering that adding soap makes dishes easier to clean without understanding anything about surfactants or molecular chemistry. You do not need to know why it works. You just need to know that it does work and to make sure someone is in charge of the soap, or in this case, in charge of the water jug. The distance from the quarry to the base of the pyramid is several hundred meters, but the blocks do not travel on open sand. Instead, they are dragged along a massive causeway, a raised paved roadway built specifically for this purpose. The causeway is constructed from limestone slabs laid flat and fitted tightly together, creating a smooth, durable surface. It is angled slightly upward as it approaches the pyramid, and it is wide enough for multiple teams to work side by side. You realise that this causeway is itself a monumental construction project, requiring thousands of tons of stone and months of labour. It is infrastructure on a scale that would not be seen again until the Romans built their road network 2,000 years later. Walking along the causeway for the first time, you're struck by the engineering sophistication. This is not a simple path cleared through the sand. This is a deliberately constructed road surface, carefully graded and paved with fitted stones. The limestone slabs that form the surface are surprisingly smooth, worn already by the passage of thousands of sledges before yours. The blocks are fitted together with impressive precision, leaving minimal gaps where sand might accumulate and create resistance. Some sections of the causeway are slightly elevated above the surrounding terrain, built up with rubble and smaller stones to create a level pathway that bypasses natural depressions in the landscape. The width of the causeway is particularly impressive. It is broad enough that 4 or 5 sledge teams can work simultaneously, without interfering with each other. This parallel processing is crucial to the project's efficiency. If only one team could move stones at a time, the pyramid construction would take centuries instead of decades. Instead, you can see multiple gangs ahead of you and behind you, each hauling their own block, creating a steady stream of limestone flowing toward the pyramid. The causeway also features regular passing points, wider sections where returning teams with empty sledges can move aside to allow loaded sledges to pass. The traffic management is surprisingly sophisticated. Along the edges of the causeway, you notice shallow channels carved into the stone. These serve as drainage systems, ensuring that rainwater, rare as it is in Egypt, does not pool on the surface and create muddy obstacles. The channels direct water away from the working surface, keeping the causeway dry and functional even in the unlikely event of a storm. This attention to detail, planning for problems that might only occur once or twice a year, demonstrates the long-term thinking of the project's designers. This causeway needs to remain functional not for weeks or months, but for decades of continuous use. The causeway does not run in a straight line from quarry to pyramid. Instead, it takes a slightly meandering route, following the natural contours of the terrain to minimise the grade changes. Pulling a multi-ton load up even a gentle incline requires significantly more effort than pulling it along a level surface, so the engineers have carefully plotted a route that trades a slightly longer distance for a more manageable slope. Where grade changes are unavoidable, the causeway features wide, gentle ramps rather than steep inclines. You learn to appreciate these design decisions when you are the one hauling the rope. But here is where things get interesting. The causeway is not just a functional piece of infrastructure, it is also a statement of power and organisation. This road represents a massive investment of resources built before the pyramid itself, purely to make the pyramid construction more efficient. It is like building a highway before you build a city, except the city is one building and the building is a geometric mountain. The causeway's very existence announces that the pharaoh commands resources on a scale that can afford to build monumental infrastructure just to support the construction of a monument. You also notice that the causeway is maintained constantly. Teams of workers sweep away accumulated sand, repair cracked or broken paving stones, and keep the surface damp with water. This maintenance is not an afterthought, but an integral part of the construction process. A deteriorating causeway would slow or halt the entire pyramid construction, so keeping it in perfect condition is a priority. Workers who are injured or too old for the heaviest labour are often assigned to causeway maintenance, ensuring that their experience and knowledge continue to benefit the project even when their physical strength has diminished. Think about that for a moment. You're walking on a purpose-built highway designed to transport millions of tons of stone, and this highway is itself a construction project that would be considered impressive if it were the only thing being built. But it is not the main attraction. It is merely the supporting infrastructure, the logistics that make the real goal achievable. It is like building an airport just to support the construction of a single airplane, except the airplane is made of stone and will never fly, and it weighs 6 million tons, and people will still be arguing about how you built it 45 centuries from now. As you approach the pyramid itself, now rising several courses high, you confront the question that has puzzled archaeologists for centuries. How did the builders raise these massive stones to ever-increasing heights? You see a ramp, but even this ramp is a temporary structure made of mud brick, rubble, and sand. The problem is that no one, not even modern scholars, can agree on exactly what type of ramp system the Egyptians used. Some believe it was a single, long, straight ramp that extended outward from one face of the pyramid, growing longer and higher as the pyramid rose. Others argue for a spiralling ramp that wrapped around the pyramid's exterior. Still, others suggest an internal ramp system built within the pyramid itself. The straight ramp theory seems simple and logical at first. You build a long, gradually inclined ramp leading up to the current working level of the pyramid. As each new course of stone is added, you extend the ramp, making it longer and higher to maintain a manageable grade. The advantage of this system is its simplicity. The disadvantage becomes apparent when you do the mathematics. To maintain a reasonable slope, perhaps 10 degrees, a ramp reaching the pyramid's summit would need to be nearly 1.5 kilometers long. Such a ramp would require more material than the pyramid itself. You would essentially be building two pyramids, one of stone and one of rubble, just to construct the first one. The spiral ramp theory offers a different solution. Instead of one long ramp, imagine a ramp that wraps around the pyramid's exterior, spiraling upward like a mountain road. This design would be much shorter than a straight ramp and would use far less material. You can see hints of this approach in the ramp currently being used, which does seem to curve around the pyramid's corner. The problem with a spiral ramp is that it would cover the pyramid's corners and edges, making it impossible for the surveyors to check the pyramid's geometry and alignment as construction progressed. How can you ensure your pyramid's corners are perfect if they are buried under the ramp? Some modern researchers have proposed a hybrid system, a combination of external ramps for the lower sections of the pyramid and internal ramps for the upper sections. French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin has suggested that once the pyramid reached a certain height, the builders constructed a spiral ramp inside the pyramid itself, just inside the outer casing stones. This internal ramp would leave the exterior visible for surveying while still providing a way to transport stones to the upper levels. Some evidence, including density anomalies detected by modern scanning technology, seems to support this theory, though it remains controversial. Standing here on the current working level, about 40 meters up, you realize that you may never know the complete answer to this question. The ramps you're using today are temporary structures that will be completely dismantled when the pyramid is finished. No physical evidence of the ramp system will survive for future archaeologists to study. The Egyptians left no written descriptions of their construction techniques, perhaps because such knowledge was so common at the time that it seemed unnecessary to record, or perhaps because the knowledge was deliberately kept secret by the skilled craftsmen and engineers who possessed it. What you do know is that the current ramp works. It is steep, perhaps too steep, and hauling blocks up its incline is the most exhausting work you have ever done, but it functions. The surface is compacted earth mixed with rubble, moistened and packed down to create a firm surface. Wooden sleepers, like railroad ties, are embedded in the ramp surface at regular intervals, providing grip and preventing sledges from sliding backward. The sides of the ramp are built up with mud brick walls that keep the material from spilling outward and provide a psychological barrier, preventing workers from getting too close to the edge and potentially falling. But here is the truly humbling part. The ramp system, whatever its final form, must be constantly modified as the pyramid grows. Each new course of stone requires the ramp to be raised and possibly extended. This is construction work on top of construction work, a temporary structure that must be rebuilt continuously throughout the decades-long project. Teams of workers labour constantly on the ramps, not on the pyramid itself, adding material, adjusting grades, and ensuring that the ramps remain functional. The ramps are not just a means to build the pyramid. They are themselves a major construction project that must be managed alongside the pyramid construction. Think about that for a moment. You are working on a temporary structure that will eventually be completely erased, leaving no evidence of its existence. Future generations will look at the finished pyramid and wonder how it was built. never knowing about the massive ramp system that made it possible, because that ramp system will have been completely dismantled and carried away. It is like building an enormous scaffolding system to construct a skyscraper, then completely removing the scaffolding so thoroughly that people looking at the building have to guess how it was constructed. Except this scaffolding might contain as much material as the building itself, and removing it without damaging the building requires almost as much effort as building it in the first place. Whatever the design of the ramp, your job remains the same: to drag stone blocks up an increasingly steep incline. With every course of stone added to the pyramid, the ramp must be extended and raised, and the angle becomes more punishing. You're now pulling a 2.5-ton block up a 10-degree incline, which might not sound steep until you're the one pulling the rope. Your team has grown to 30 men, all leaning into the ropes, feet churning against the mud brick surface of the ramp. The overseer chants a rhythmic work song, and you pull in time with his voice. 1 step, pull, 1 step, pull. Your world narrows to the burning in your shoulders, the rope cutting into your palms, and the endless repetition of the chant. The ramp surface, which seemed firm and solid when you were walking on it unloaded, becomes treacherous under the weight and friction of the sledge. The packed earth and rubble begin to shift and crumble under the intense pressure, creating ruts and soft spots that make the sledge want to veer off course. Teams of workers follow behind the sledge gangs, constantly repairing the ramp's surface, adding more material to the worn areas, and compacting it down with wooden tampers. This maintenance is crucial. A deteriorating ramp surface could cause a sledge to tip or become stuck, halting the entire operation and potentially injuring workers. The steepness of the incline means that the work is no longer just difficult, it is dangerous. If the rope were to break or if the sledge were to shift unexpectedly, it could slide backward down the ramp, crushing anyone in its path. To prevent this catastrophe, a second team of workers follows behind the sledge, ready to wedge wooden chocks under the runners at a moment's notice if the forward progress stops. These safety workers are arguably the most important members of the operation, and they are chosen for their quick reflexes and steady nerves. They must stay close enough to react instantly, but far enough away to avoid being crushed if something goes wrong. As you climb higher up the ramp, the wind becomes a new factor. At ground level, the air was still and stifling hot. Up here, 40 or 50 meters above the desert floor, the wind whips across the ramp with surprising force. On some days, it provides welcome relief from the heat. On other days, it threatens to unbalance workers, especially those carrying tools or baskets of smaller stones. The overseer must judge the wind conditions carefully, sometimes halting work on the highest sections when the wind becomes too dangerous. A worker blown off the ramp from this height would not survive the fall. The rhythm of the work is everything. The overseer's chant is not just for entertainment or morale. It is a practical tool that coordinates the efforts of 30 men who cannot see each other, because they are spread out along the length of the rope. When everyone pulls in time with the chant, the force applied to the sledge is smooth and consistent. When someone falls out of rhythm, pulling when others are resetting their position, the load becomes jerky and inefficient, and the risk of the rope breaking increases dramatically. You learn to listen to the overseer's voice above all other sounds, to let it guide your movements, to become part of a coordinated human machine. Your body adapts to the work in unexpected ways. The muscles in your legs, back and shoulders become stronger, more defined. Your hands develop thick calluses that protect against the rope burn. Your lungs expand, allowing you to work at this elevated position without gasping for breath. But the work also takes its toll. Your joints ache constantly. Your back develops a chronic stiffness that never quite goes away, even during your rest periods. You watch younger workers struggle, and older workers who can no longer keep up being reassigned to lighter duties. This is work that ages a man, that uses up his physical strength like fuel being burned to power a great engine. But here is what surprises you. Despite the difficulty, despite the pain and exhaustion, there is a strange satisfaction in the work. You're not just hauling stones, you are raising a mountain. Each block you drag up this ramp becomes part of a structure that is already the largest building project anyone has ever seen. You can turn around during a rest break and look down at the plateau below, at the causeway stretching back to the quarries, at the workers' village with its thousands of inhabitants, and you can see that you are part of something extraordinary. The work is brutal, but it is not meaningless. Think about that for a moment. You're essentially climbing a mountain while carrying another, smaller mountain on your back. Except the mountain you are climbing does not exist yet. So you are also building it as you go. Your reward for reaching the top is not a spectacular view or a sense of personal achievement. Your reward is getting to go back down, pick up another stone, and do it all over again. And you will do this thousands of times over the coming months. It is like being a gym membership where the only exercise is dragging your car up a steep hill, except you do not get to drive the car back down. You have to walk, and tomorrow you get to do it again, except the hill is now slightly higher, because yesterday you added to it. While you've been working with the rough limestone blocks that form the pyramid's core, another team is working with a completely different material, fine white Tura limestone. These casing stones are being brought from quarries located across the Nile River, about 15 kilometers away, and they are of a far higher quality. They are dense, almost crystalline, and when polished they shine like marble in the sun. These stones are cut with far greater precision than the rough core blocks, for they will form the smooth, gleaming outer surface of the finished pyramid. You see the stonemasons working on these blocks, painstakingly shaping them so that their edges fit together with almost no visible seam. The Tura quarries are famous throughout Egypt for producing the finest limestone available. Unlike the coarser limestone of the Giza Plateau, Tura limestone is fine-grained, dense, and almost white in colour. It can be polished to a brilliant shine that catches and reflects sunlight with stunning intensity. When the pyramid is complete and all the casing stones are in place and polished, it will be visible from enormous distances, a gleaming white beacon rising from the desert like a geometric mountain made of light. This is not accidental. The visual impact is part of the pyramid's purpose, a statement of the pharaoh's divine power that can be seen by anyone approaching the capital. Transporting the Tura limestone presents unique challenges. The blocks must be quarried with far greater care than the core stones, because any fracture or imperfection will be visible on the pyramid's exterior surface. Once quarried, the blocks must be transported across the Nile. During the inundation season, when the river is high, this is accomplished using large wooden barges capable of carrying dozens of tons of stone. The casing stones are carefully loaded onto the barges, cushioned with reeds to prevent damage during transport. The journey across the river is relatively short, but it requires skill to navigate the current and land the heavy barges at the proper location on the west bank. You watch the stonemasons at work on the casing stones and realise you're observing a completely different level of craftsmanship. While your work in the quarry and on the sledge gangs requires strength and endurance, the work of shaping casing stones requires precision and patience. Each casing stone must be cut so that its inner face, the side that will rest against the pyramid's core, is flat but rough, providing a good bonding surface. The outer face, however, must be perfectly smooth and set at precisely the correct angle to maintain the pyramid's slope of approximately 51 degrees. The tools used on the casing stones are similar to those used in the quarry, copper chisels and stone hammers, but the technique is different. The stonemasons work with smaller, finer chisels, removing tiny amounts of stone with each strike. They constantly check their work with wooden straight edges and special angle measuring tools. A stone that is even slightly off angle will create a visible irregularity in the pyramid's surface, a flaw that would be unacceptable in a monument meant to last for eternity. The rejected stones, those with imperfections or incorrect angles, are sent to be used as core blocks. Only perfect stones become casing stones. The edges of the casing stones receive special attention. Where one stone meets another, the joint must be nearly invisible. The stonemasons achieve this by grinding the edges with sand and water, a laborious process that can take hours per stone. Some of the joints in the finished pyramid are so tight that you cannot fit a knife blade between the stones. This level of precision, achieved with only hand tools and patience, is remarkable. Modern architects examining the pyramid's remaining casing stones have expressed amazement at the quality of the stonework. But here is where the economics of the project become clear. Natural limestone is expensive, not in terms of money, since the Egyptian economy is not cash-based, but in terms of labour and transport. Every casing stone requires specialised workers, careful quarrying, river transport and skilled finishing work. The pyramid requires approximately 144,000 casing stones to cover its exterior surface. The investment in just the outer layer of the pyramid is enormous. This is why the core of the pyramid is built from rougher, locally quarried stone. The casing stones are a luxury material, used where quality and appearance are critical. You begin to understand that the pyramid is actually two structures built simultaneously. The inner pyramid, made of rough core blocks, provides the mass and structure. The outer pyramid, made of carefully finished casing stones, provides the appearance and the symbolic perfection. The two must be coordinated carefully. If the core rises too quickly without the casing stones ready, the geometry cannot be checked and corrected. If the casing stones are prepared but the core is not ready, valuable finished stones sit unused, tying up resources. The project management required to balance these two parallel construction efforts is itself a remarkable achievement. Think about that for a moment. You're building a mountain and then covering it with a completely different, more expensive mountain made of better stone. It is like building a house out of cinder blocks and then covering every surface with marble tiles, except the house is 146 metres tall. Each tile weighs several tons, and they all have to fit together so perfectly that you cannot see the seams. And you're doing this with copper tools and no ability to order replacement materials from a supplier, because you are the supplier. And if you run out of perfect white limestone, you have to go quarry more from a location 15 kilometres away across a river. The most impressive stones of all do not come from anywhere near Giza. The massive granite blocks that will form the king's chamber and the relieving chambers above it are being quarried in Aswan, nearly 800 kilometres to the south. These blocks are enormous, some weighing 50 to 80 tons, and they are made of red granite, a stone so hard that copper chisels are nearly useless against it. You hear stories from the river workers who transport these monsters. The granite blocks are loaded onto specially built barges during the Nile's inundation season, when the river is high and strong enough to carry such weight. The journey downriver takes weeks, and unloading these giants at Giza is an engineering challenge all its own. Aswan sits at the first cataract of the Nile, where the river flows through a landscape of massive granite formations that rise from the water like the bones of the earth. This is some of the hardest stone available in Egypt, far more durable than limestone. While limestone will wear and erode over centuries, granite can last for millions of years virtually unchanged. This durability makes it the perfect material for the most important chamber in the pyramid, the room where the pharaoh's body will rest. But that same hardness makes granite extraordinarily difficult to work with. The quarrying techniques used at Aswan are different from those at Giza. Copper chisels, which work adequately on limestone, simply bounce off granite without making a meaningful cut. Instead, the Aswan quarries rely heavily on harder stone tools, using balls of dolerite, a dense volcanic rock, as hammers. Workers pound these stone balls against the granite surface, pulverizing the rock grain by grain in a process that is mind-numbingly slow. A granite block that would take 3 days to quarry in limestone might take 3 weeks or even 3 months in granite. The work requires patience that borders on the inhuman. The workers at Aswan also use the wedge technique, but with an important variation. Rather than using wooden wedges that expand with water, they sometimes use dry wooden wedges driven into carefully prepared slots and then set on fire. The expanding gases and the charring of the wood create pressure, but more importantly, the intense localized heat causes differential expansion in the granite, encouraging it to crack along the desired line. Other times they simply exploit the natural cracks and weaknesses in the granite, following existing fissures to extract usable blocks. Granite, for all its hardness, is more brittle than limestone and more prone to natural fracturing. Once a granite block is freed from the bedrock, the real challenge begins: transportation. An 80-ton block of granite is too heavy for a standard sledge. Instead, the blocks are loaded onto massive wooden cradles reinforced with bronze fittings. These cradles are then dragged to the Nile's edge, where special heavy-duty barges are waiting. These barges are essentially large wooden platforms built from the strongest timber available, designed to carry a single massive stone. The loading process itself can take days, using ramps, levers, and hundreds of workers. The journey from Aswan to Giza is approximately 800 kilometers and can only be undertaken during the inundation season when the Nile is at its highest level. The river's current helps carry the heavy barges northward, but the journey is still slow and dangerous. The barge pilots must navigate carefully to avoid sandbars and rocks that could ground or capsize their vessel. A granite block falling off a barge into the Nile would be lost forever, sinking to the riverbed and taking months of quarrying work with it. The cargo is too valuable to risk, so the barges move cautiously, often travelling only during daylight hours when the river's hazards are visible. You have never made this journey yourself, but you have spoken with the river workers who have. They describe weeks spent on the river, sleeping on the barges, eating simple rations, constantly monitoring the cargo to ensure it remains stable. They describe the terror of watching the barge ride low in the water, loaded so heavily that the river seems to be just waiting for an excuse to swallow it. They describe the relief of finally arriving at the Giza landing site, having successfully transported a piece of stone worth more in labour investment than most Egyptians will earn in a lifetime. But here is what strikes you most. The decision to use Aswan granite for the king's chamber is not just practical, it is symbolic. The pharaoh could have built his burial chamber from limestone like the rest of the pyramid. It would have been easier and faster, but granite, with its incredible hardness and distinctive red colour, makes a statement. It says that the pharaoh commanded resources from the furthest reaches of Egypt. It says that no effort was too great, no distance too far, no stone too hard to serve the pharaoh's divine purpose. The granite blocks are a demonstration of power as much as they are functional building materials. Think about that for a moment. You're transporting blocks of stone that weigh as much as a dozen elephants across 800 kilometers of river, using wooden boats and rope, because someone decided that only the hardest possible stone was acceptable for one specific room in a building made of millions of tons of perfectly adequate limestone. It is like building a house out of regular bricks and then insisting that one particular closet be built from diamond-encrusted titanium shipped from another continent. Not because you need it to be that strong, but because you can, and because you want everyone to know you can. One of the most underappreciated aspects of building the Great Pyramid is the sheer logistical achievement of feeding tens of thousands of workers for decades. You quickly learn that your daily rations are surprisingly generous. Each worker receives a daily allotment of bread, beer, and onions, supplemented with fish, lentils, and occasionally meat. The bakeries near the workers' village operate around the clock, producing an estimated 4,000 loaves of bread per day. The beer is weak by modern standards, more like a liquid bread than an intoxicating beverage, but it is nutritious and safe to drink. Recent archaeological excavations at the workers' village have uncovered the bones of cattle, sheep, and goats, evidence of a diet that, while simple, was far better than what many workers ate in their home villages. The scale of the feeding operation is staggering when you actually stop to think about it. 20 to 30,000 workers, each requiring approximately 3,000 calories per day to fuel their heavy labour, means the pyramid project must produce or require somewhere between 60 and 90 million calories daily. In practical terms, this means thousands of loaves of bread, hundreds of fish, numerous animals slaughtered for meat, and enormous quantities of beer, all produced and distributed every single day without fail. A single day without food would bring the entire project to a halt. 2 days without food would trigger a crisis. The logistics of preventing food shortages are almost as impressive as the engineering of the pyramid itself. The bread, your primary source of calories, is made from emmer wheat, an ancient grain that the Egyptians have cultivated for thousands of years. The bread-making process begins in large, dedicated bakeries, where workers grind the grain between stone mills, producing coarse flour that still contains bits of stone from the grinding process. This stone grit will gradually wear down your teeth, a common problem among Egyptians of all social classes. The flour is mixed with water, allowed to ferment slightly, and then formed into flat loaves that are baked in large clay ovens. The resulting bread is dense, chewy, and filling. It is not particularly flavourful, but it provides the sustained energy needed for physical labour. The beer, which is provided in generous daily rations, is crucial to the operation. Water from the Nile, while abundant, can carry diseases and parasites that cause illness. The brewing process, which involves boiling the water and fermenting the grain, kills most harmful organisms, making beer safer to drink than water. The beer provided to workers is weak, perhaps 2 or 3% alcohol, just enough to provide some flavour and preservation, but not enough to impair judgment or coordination. Drinking beer throughout the day keeps workers hydrated and provides additional calories from the grain sugars. The onions, which appear in your daily rations with monotonous regularity, are not just a cheap filler vegetable. They are actually providing crucial nutrients that prevent certain deficiencies. Onions contain vitamin C, which helps prevent scurvy, and various other compounds that support overall health. The fact that onions store well without refrigeration makes them an ideal provision for a large workforce. You learn to eat them raw, cooked in stews, or mixed with bread. After several months, you stop tasting them at all. They become simply fuel, no different from the bread. The meat, when it appears, is a special occasion. Archaeological evidence suggests that cattle, sheep, and goats were slaughtered regularly to provide protein to the workers, but meat was not a daily item for everyone. More likely, meat was distributed on a rotating basis, or given as rewards to work gangs that had performed particularly well, or served on special ceremonial occasions. When your gang does receive a meat ration, it is a cause for celebration. The meat is usually boiled in large pots to feed many people, creating a rich broth that is served with bread. The taste of beef or mutton, after weeks of bread and onions, is almost overwhelming. But here is what truly impresses you about the feeding operation. It is not just the quantity of food being produced, it is the organisation and distribution. Every worker knows exactly when and where to collect their rations. The scribes maintain careful records of who has been fed and who has not, preventing both shortages and people claiming double portions. The food production facilities, the bakeries, breweries, and butchering areas are located close enough to the workers' village to allow efficient distribution, but far enough away that the smoke, smells, and waste do not overwhelm the living quarters. Someone designed this system carefully, thinking through not just the immediate needs, but also the long-term sustainability of feeding a small city for decades. The workers who staff the bakeries and breweries are themselves part of the pyramid workforce, though they never touch a stone. They work long shifts in hot, smoky conditions, producing the food that keeps everyone else working. The millers who grind the grain develop powerful arms and chronic respiratory problems from breathing grain dust. The bakers who tend the ovens work in temperatures that make the desert sun seem cool by comparison. The brewers who manage the fermentation process must have a specialised knowledge of timing and ingredients. These workers are as essential to building the pyramid as the stone haulers, yet their work is invisible, hidden inside the bakeries and breweries. Think about that for a moment. Building the pyramid requires not just moving millions of tons of stone, but also producing millions of loaves of bread and brewing millions of litres of beer. The pyramid is not just a construction project. It is a complete economic system, a supply chain that begins with farmers growing wheat in fields along the Nile and ends with a worker receiving their daily rations at the construction site. It is like running a catering company that serves 30,000 people every single day for 20 plus years. Except you cannot order supplies from vendors because you are the vendor, and if you run out of food, your customers will riot, and your customer satisfaction survey is a pyramid that needs to last for eternity. Despite all precautions, accidents are common. Men fall from the ramps, stones crush feet, ropes snap and whip across faces, and the relentless physical labour leads to chronic injuries. You are surprised to discover that the workers' village includes a medical facility where injured workers can receive care. Egyptian medicine is a mixture of practical knowledge and magical rituals. The physicians, trained in the temples, know how to set broken bones, stitch wounds, and treat infections with poultices made from honey, which has natural antibacterial properties. Skeletal remains found in the workers' cemetery show evidence of healed fractures and even successful amputations, proof that workers who were injured were not simply abandoned but were cared for and, in many cases, returned to health. The medical facility is a long, low building near the workers' village, with multiple rooms for treating different types of injuries and illnesses. The building is better ventilated than the sleeping barracks, with high windows that allow air circulation, crucial for preventing the spread of disease among injured workers confined to bed rest. The floors are swept clean daily, and the physicians insist on a level of cleanliness that seems almost obsessive to you at first, until you notice that wounds treated in the clean environment seem to heal better and faster than those treated in the field. The physicians themselves are fascinating individuals. They are educated men, often with connections to the temple priesthood, who have studied medical texts written on papyrus scrolls. These texts contain accumulated knowledge passed down through generations, describing various injuries and illnesses, their symptoms, prognoses, and treatments. The physicians can be remarkably effective with certain conditions. A broken arm, if properly set and splintered, will heal with full function restored. Deep cuts can be stitched closed with copper needles and linen thread, minimizing scarring and preventing infection. Burns, common in a workplace involving fire for metalworking, can be treated with applications of honey and resin, but Egyptian medicine also includes elements that seem strange to modern understanding. The physicians frequently recite incantations and prayers while treating patients, believing that illness and injury have supernatural as well as physical components. Amulets are prescribed alongside poultices. The practical and the magical are intertwined in ways that reflect the Egyptian worldview, where the physical and spiritual realms are not separate but overlapping. Interestingly, this combination seems to work reasonably well. The rituals provide psychological comfort to injured workers, reducing stress and anxiety, which modern medicine recognizes as beneficial to healing. You witness the treatment of a worker who fell from a scaffolding and broke his leg. The physician examines the injury carefully, probing the leg with gentle fingers to assess the extent of the damage. He determines that the bone is broken but has not pierced the skin, which he explains is a favourable situation. Two assistants hold the worker firmly while the physician manipulates the leg, pulling it straight and aligning the broken bone ends. The worker screams in pain despite being given a strong beer mixed with opium poppy extract. Once the bone is set, the physician applies a splint made from palmwood strips bound tightly with linen bandages soaked in resin. As the resin hardens, it creates a rigid cast that immobilizes the leg, allowing the bone to heal. The physician explains that the worker will remain in the medical facility for several weeks while the bone heals. During this time, he will receive his full food rations and will be excused from work duties. Once the bone has healed sufficiently, he will be assigned to light duties, perhaps helping with tool maintenance or assisting in the bakeries, until he is fully recovered. The level of care and the recognition that an injured worker deserves time to heal properly are surprising to you. This is not a system that views workers as disposable. The medical facility also treats chronic conditions that develop from the work itself. Back problems are endemic among stone haulers. Respiratory issues from breathing limestone dust plague quarry workers. Joint pain and arthritis affect older workers. The physicians provide what relief they can, using massage, heat treatments, and herbal preparations. They cannot cure these chronic conditions, but they can manage the pain and keep workers functional. The physicians also recognize when a worker's body has been used up, when the accumulated damage is too severe to continue heavy labor. These workers are retired from stone hauling but often given other positions within the project, honoring their service rather than discarding them. But here is what strikes you most about the medical facility. Its very existence is a statement about how the pyramid builders value their workers. The state could have chosen to simply replace injured workers with fresh recruits. Instead, they invested resources in medical care, in physicians and medicines and dedicated facilities to preserve and restore the workforce. This investment makes practical sense. Experienced workers are more efficient than new recruits, but it also reflects a recognition of workers' humanity and worth. Think about that for a moment. You're working on a construction project that includes its own hospital. staffed by trained physicians who will set your broken bones, stitch your wounds, and give you time off to heal. This is a level of worker care that many modern construction sites struggle to match. It is like having an occupational health and safety department, except instead of filing injury reports and reviewing safety protocols, they're chanting spells and applying honey bandages, and somehow it actually works well enough that you can survive having your leg crushed by a 2-ton stone and potentially return to work months later. You begin to understand that the pyramid construction site is not a chaotic mob of workers, but a highly organised society with a clear hierarchy. At the top is Hemiunu, the architect and vizier. Below him are the overseers of various departments, the overseer of quarries, the overseer of stone haulers, the overseer of ramps. These men are literate, skilled administrators who manage thousands of workers and ensure that materials arrive at the right place at the right time. Below them are the skilled craftsmen, the stonemasons, the carpenters, the surveyors. And at the bottom, but by no means less important, are you and the thousands of other labourers whose muscles power this entire enterprise. You are part of a team, a gang, and your gang has a name painted on your sledge: the Vigorous Gang. The hierarchy is not just about authority, it is about specialisation and efficiency. Each level of the organisation has specific responsibilities and skills. Hemiunu does not tell individual workers where to place each stone. He creates the overall design and establishes the standards that must be met. The department overseers translate those standards into practical work assignments. The gang foremen coordinate the day-to-day labour, and the individual workers execute the physical tasks. Information and commands flow down the hierarchy, while reports on progress and problems flow upward. It is a system of management that would be recognisable to any modern project manager. The gang system is particularly clever. Your gang of 20 men becomes your primary social unit. You work together, eat together, and sleep in adjacent spaces in the barracks. Your gang has a foreman, usually an experienced worker, who has proven himself capable and reliable. The foreman is responsible for ensuring that your gang meets its daily work quotas and that you maintain the quality standards required. But the foreman is not a distant authority figure. He works alongside you, hauling the same ropes, sweating in the same sun. His authority comes from competence and experience, not from social class or political appointment. The gangs are grouped into larger units called files, a Greek word used by later historians to describe divisions of approximately 2,000 workers. Your file, which might be named something like the Great File or the Enduring File, includes about 100 gangs. The file is managed by an overseer who coordinates the work of multiple gangs, ensures that materials are distributed fairly, and resolves disputes between gangs. The files compete with each other in friendly rivalry, each one trying to move more stones, complete more courses, or achieve better quality work than the others. This competition, carefully managed by the overseers, increases productivity without creating destructive conflict. Above the filers are the department overseers, the senior administrators who manage entire aspects of the project. The overseer of quarries manages all quarrying operations, from the local Giza quarries to the Tura limestone quarries to the distant Aswan granite quarries. He must ensure a steady supply of stone to the construction site, anticipating needs months in advance. The overseer of stone haulers coordinates the movement of stones from quarries to the pyramid, managing the sledge teams, the causeway maintenance, and the ramp construction. The overseer of craftsmen manages the skilled workers who finish the casing stones and handle the delicate placement of the final blocks. These senior overseers are literate men who maintain detailed records on papyrus scrolls. They track the number of stones quarried, transported, and placed each day. They monitor food supplies and ensure that the bakeries and breweries are producing sufficient rations. They maintain worker rosters, noting who is present, who is injured, and who has completed their rotation and returned home. This administrative apparatus is as sophisticated as anything in the modern world, just implemented with different technology. Instead of spreadsheets and databases, they have papyrus scrolls and trained scribes with excellent memories. At the very top of the hierarchy, below only the pharaoh himself, is Hemiunu. You've seen him occasionally walking through the construction site with his retinue of scribes and assistants, examining the work, consulting with the overseers. He carries himself with the confidence of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. His decisions affect thousands of workers and shape a structure that will stand for millennia. Yet he is also practical and hands-on, willing to examine individual stones, to question workers about techniques, to listen to suggestions from experienced foremen. He is not a distant, imperious figure, but an engaged manager who understands that his success depends on the skill and effort of everyone below him. But here is what makes this hierarchy work. It is based primarily on competence rather than birth. While Hemianu holds his position partly because of his royal blood, the gang foremen, file overseers, and department managers are chosen for their skills and experience. A talented stone hauler can rise to become a gang foreman. An exceptional foreman can become a fili overseer. The system rewards capability and hard work, providing an incentive for workers to excel and a mechanism for identifying and promoting talent. It is a meritocracy embedded within a hierarchical structure. Think about that for a moment. You are part of an organization that employs tens of thousands of people, organized into a clear hierarchy with multiple levels of management, competing teams with names and identities, a sophisticated record-keeping system, and promotion based on merit. This is organizational complexity on a scale that would not be seen again for thousands of years. It is like working for a modern corporation with org charts and project management methodologies and team competition and performance reviews, except instead of producing quarterly earnings reports, you are producing a geometric mountain that will confuse and inspire humanity for 45 centuries. As you watch the surveyors at work, you begin to appreciate the astonishing precision of the pyramid. The base of the Great Pyramid is a nearly perfect square, with each side measuring approximately 230 metres, and the error between the longest and shortest sides is less than 5 centimetres. The sides are aligned almost exactly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with an error of less than 1/20th of a degree. This level of accuracy, achieved with only copper tools, wooden measuring rods, and plumb bobs, is staggering. The surveyors use a tool called a merket, a simple sighting instrument made from a palm rib, to align the pyramid with the North Star, and they use water-filled trenches to establish a perfectly level baseline. The surveying work began long before the first stone was placed. The surveyors started by establishing true north with remarkable precision. They used a technique called the circular method, which involved observing the North Star, Polaris, and marking its position at different times throughout the night. Because Earth rotates, the star appears to trace a small circle in the sky. By marking the westernmost and easternmost positions of the star and bisecting the angle between them, the surveyors could determine true north with extraordinary accuracy. This work required clear nights, patient observation, and precise marking. The surveyors who performed this task were specialists, trained in astronomical observation and geometric calculation. Once north was established, the surveyors marked out the pyramid's base. This required creating 4 perfectly straight lines of approximately 230 metres each, meeting at exactly 90-degree corners. To achieve this, they used measuring rods, standardised wooden sticks of precise length, and stretched ropes coated with red ochre that could be snapped against the ground to create straight reference lines. But the real genius was in establishing a perfectly level baseline. The pyramid must sit on a level foundation, or it will be unstable. To create this level surface, the surveyors cut channels into the bedrock and filled them with water. Water, obeying gravity, naturally finds a level surface. By measuring down from the water surface at multiple points, the surveyors could map the irregularities in the bedrock and know exactly how much stone needed to be removed to create a level platform. You watch the surveyors checking the work constantly as the pyramid rises. They use plumb bobs, weighted strings that hang vertically due to gravity, to ensure that the walls are rising straight and true. They use wooden set squares, large L-shaped tools with precisely measured angles, to check that corners remain at 90 degrees. They use levelling instruments, essentially wooden frames with a plumb bob hanging from the centre, to ensure that each course of stone is perfectly horizontal. This constant checking and correction is crucial. A small error at the bottom of the pyramid would be magnified as the structure rises, potentially making the top courses impossible to fit properly. The surveyors also manage the critical task of maintaining the pyramid's slope. Each course of stones must be set back slightly from the course below it, creating the characteristic slope of the pyramid's sides. The angle must be consistent on all four faces, or the pyramid will be lopsided. The surveyors use angled templates, wooden guides cut to the precise slope angle, to check each course as it is laid. Any block that protrudes too far or sits too far back is immediately identified and adjusted before the next course is placed. This quality control happens constantly every day, for every course throughout the pyramid's construction. The precision extends to details that seem almost obsessive. The corners of the pyramid, where two faces meet, must be perfectly vertical straight lines from base to summit. To achieve this, the surveyors establish reference lines using taut ropes stretched from the base corners to the working level. These ropes serve as guides that the stone placers must follow exactly. The casing stones at the corners are placed with extra care, checked and rechecked to ensure they maintain the perfect edge. A corner that wanders even slightly would be a visible flaw, an imperfection in a monument meant to embody geometric perfection. But here is what truly astonishes modern engineers. The Egyptians achieved this precision without any of the tools we consider essential for such work. No laser levels, no theodolites, no GPS, no computer-aided design. They used observation, geometry, careful measurement, and constant checking. The surveyors' skills were based on accumulated knowledge passed down through generations, refined through the construction of earlier pyramids, some of which failed catastrophically and taught valuable lessons about what not to do. The precision of the Great Pyramid represents the culmination of decades of learning and improvement. The surveyors hold a special status within the construction hierarchy. They are educated men, literate in hieroglyphics, trained in mathematics and geometry. They wear clean white kilts, distinguishing them from the dusty, sweaty labourers. They carry scribal palettes and make careful notes of measurements. They are treated with respect by even the senior overseers, because everyone understands that the surveyor's work is the foundation upon which the entire project rests. An error in surveying cannot be hidden or corrected later. It becomes embedded in the structure, a permanent flaw. Think about that for a moment. You are building a structure that is 230 metres on each side and 146 metres tall, and you are achieving accuracy measured in centimetres, using only ropes, sticks, and water. The tools are simple, but the knowledge of how to use them is sophisticated. It is like navigating across an ocean using only the stars and a piece of string, except instead of getting approximately to the right place, you need to hit a target the size of a dinner plate from hundreds of kilometres away, and you cannot make course corrections once you have started. And if you miss the target, everyone will know, because your mistake will be visible for 45 centuries. Deep within the rising structure, work is progressing on the most important space in the entire pyramid, the king's chamber. This is the room where Khufu's sarcophagus will rest for eternity, and it must be built to last. The chamber is being constructed entirely from massive red granite blocks brought from Aswan. The roof of the chamber is particularly impressive. 9 enormous granite beams, each weighing approximately 50 tons, will span the chamber's width. Above these beams, the builders are constructing 5 relieving chambers, empty spaces designed to distribute the weight of the millions of tons of stone above and prevent the king's chamber from being crushed. It is engineering on an intuitive, empirical level, learned from the catastrophic failures of earlier pyramids. The king's chamber is located not in the centre of the pyramid at ground level as you might expect, but high within the structure, approximately 1/3 of the way up from the base. Getting the enormous granite blocks to this elevated position requires extraordinary effort. The blocks are too large and heavy to be hauled up the external ramps like the standard limestone blocks. Instead, they must be dragged through the pyramid's internal passages, a tight, claustrophobic journey that sometimes requires widening the passages temporarily to accommodate the oversized stones. You're not working on the king's chamber yourself. That work is reserved for the most skilled craftsmen and trusted workers, but you hear stories from those who do. They describe the challenge of manoeuvring a 50-ton granite beam through passages barely wider than the beam itself. The work requires dozens of men pulling on ropes, coordinated by shouted commands that echo through the enclosed spaces. The risk of a granite block becoming wedged, or worse, crushing workers in the narrow confines is ever present. This work proceeds more slowly than any other part of the pyramid construction, sometimes taking days to move a single block a few dozen meters. The walls of the king's chamber are built from granite blocks fitted together with remarkable precision. The joints between blocks are nearly invisible, ground smooth so that the walls appear almost seamless. The chamber measures approximately 10 meters long, 5 meters wide and 6 meters high, dimensions that were carefully calculated to accommodate the sarcophagus and provide the correct proportions according to Egyptian sacred geometry. The sarcophagus itself, carved from a single massive block of red granite, was likely placed in the chamber before the roof beams were installed, because it is too large to fit through the entrance passage. Once the chamber is sealed, the sarcophagus will be trapped inside forever, precisely as intended. The roof of the king's chamber is the structure's most critical element. 9 massive granite beams are being placed side by side to span the chamber's width. Each beam weighs approximately 50 tons, and placing them requires leverage systems using wooden beams and rope, precise coordination, and more than a little luck. Once in position, these beams will form a flat ceiling capable of supporting immense weight. But the builders are not satisfied with just this single ceiling. They understand that the weight of the pyramid pressing down could eventually crack even these massive granite beams. Above the roof beams, the builders are constructing 5 separate relieving chambers, empty spaces each with its own ceiling of granite beams, stacked one above the other. The theory, developed through experience with earlier pyramids where chambers collapsed or cracked, is that these relieving chambers will distribute the weight of the pyramid around the king's chamber rather than directly onto it. The weight will be channeled to the sides, leaving the burial chamber itself protected in a pocket of reduced stress. The topmost relieving chamber has a pointed roof, a simple gabled structure that will help shed weight to either side. This system of relieving chambers represents sophisticated structural engineering. The builders did not have the mathematics to calculate stress and load distribution, but they had empirical knowledge gained from building multiple pyramids. They had seen what worked and what failed. The bent pyramid and the collapsed pyramid at medium taught valuable lessons about structural stability. The relieving chambers above the king's chamber are the practical application of those lessons, a solution developed through observation and experimentation, rather than theoretical calculation. Inside the king's chamber, the builders leave one mysterious feature: 2 small shafts, rectangular channels about 20 centimeters square, that angle upward from the north and south walls of the chamber through the body of the pyramid. These shafts were originally thought to be ventilation channels, but recent analysis suggests they may have had astronomical or religious significance, perhaps aligned with specific stars that played a role in the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The shafts required careful planning and construction, as they had to be built into the pyramid as it rose, maintaining their angle through dozens of courses of stone. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere within the pyramid you're helping to build, there is a chamber made entirely of granite brought from 800 kilometers away, with a roof made of 9 50-ton beams, protected by 5 additional chambers stacked above it, and featuring shafts precisely angled to point at specific stars. This chamber will be sealed forever once the pharaoh is buried, never to be seen again by human eyes. All of this effort, all of this precision, all of this engineering genius, dedicated to creating a room that is meant to remain permanently closed. It is like building a bank vault to store something priceless, except you are building the vault inside a mountain, and the mountain does not exist yet, so you are building that too. And once you put the priceless thing inside, you are going to weld the vault shut, bury it under millions of tons of stone, and hope nobody finds it for thousands of years. One of the most architecturally stunning features of the pyramid is the Grand Gallery, a long, upward-sloping corridor that leads from the lower passages to the king's chamber. Unlike the cramped, low passages elsewhere in the pyramid, the Grand Gallery is over 8 metres high, with a corbelled ceiling where each course of stone projects slightly inward until they nearly meet at the top. Walking through this space is like walking through the ribcage of some giant stone beast. No one is entirely certain why the Grand Gallery was built with such dramatic height. Some scholars believe it was designed to store the granite plugs that would seal the king's chamber after the burial, while others think it served a ceremonial purpose. Either way, it is a breathtaking piece of ancient architecture. The Grand Gallery measures approximately 47 metres long and rises at the same steep angle as the ascending passage it extends from, about 26 degrees. This steep slope means that walking through it requires careful footing. The floor is not smooth, but features a central ramp with a level surface and raised edges on either side. These side platforms run the entire length of the gallery and contain regular slots cut into the stone, 27 pairs of them spaced evenly along the gallery's length. The purpose of these slots has puzzled archaeologists for centuries. Some believe they held wooden beams that supported the granite blocking stones before they were released to seal the passage after the king's burial. The corbelled ceiling is the gallery's most impressive feature. Rather than spanning the width with massive beams as in the king's chamber, the builders used a technique called corbelling, where each course of stone extends slightly beyond the one below it. The walls lean inward in 7 distinct steps, each layer projecting about 8 centimetres toward the centre, until the gap at the top is narrow enough to be bridged by flat roofing stones. This technique distributes the weight laterally, allowing the creation of a tall, narrow space without requiring impossibly large lintels. It is an elegant structural solution that demonstrates the builder's sophisticated understanding of how stone bears weight. Building the Grand Gallery required extraordinary precision. Each of the limestone blocks that form the corbelled walls had to be cut at precise angles and dimensions. The blocks had to be placed so that they leaned inward at exactly the right angle, steep enough to create the corbel effect, but not so steep that they would slide inward over time. The joints between blocks had to be tight and properly aligned, because any weakness in the corbelling could lead to progressive failure, where one slipping block would trigger a cascade of failures. The fact that the Grand Gallery has stood stable for over 4,000 years is testament to the skill of its builders. The acoustic properties of the Grand Gallery are also remarkable, though whether this was intentional or accidental is unknown. The tall, narrow space with its stone surfaces creates unusual resonances. A sound made at one end of the gallery echoes and reverberates in complex ways. Some researchers have speculated that this acoustic quality might have been deliberately incorporated for ceremonial purposes, perhaps for chanting or music during the king's funeral procession. Others argue that the acoustics are simply a byproduct of the geometry and were not considered by the builders. Either way, standing in the Grand Gallery and hearing how sound behaves in this ancient space is an eerie experience. The effort required to construct the Grand Gallery is staggering when you consider that this elaborate architectural feature serves ultimately as a hallway. It connects the entrance passages to the king's chamber, but this connection could have been achieved with a simple corridor like those found elsewhere in the pyramid. The decision to create something so tall, so precisely engineered, and so architecturally sophisticated for what is essentially a transitional space suggests that the Grand Gallery had significance beyond mere function. Perhaps it was meant to impress the funeral procession, to create a sense of ascending toward the divine as they approach the burial chamber. Perhaps it was a demonstration of architectural mastery, a showing off of what the builders could achieve. The Grand Gallery also serves a practical purpose related to the pyramid's security. After the pharaoh's body was placed in the king's chamber and the funeral rites were complete, the entrance passages needed to be sealed to protect the burial from tomb robbers. The Grand Gallery is believed to have stored 3 large granite plugs, blocks of stone that were too large to fit through the ascending passage above them. These plugs were held in place by temporary supports. After the burial, workers would knock away the supports, and the plugs would slide down the ascending passage, wedging themselves into the corridor and creating an impenetrable barrier. The workers who released these plugs would then escape through a shaft that connected to the descending passage, becoming the last humans to see the interior of the pyramid as the builders intended it. But here is where the engineering becomes almost poignant. the workers who built the Grand Gallery, who spent months or years cutting and placing each precisely angled stone, creating this soaring architectural marvel, knew that it would be seen by humans only briefly. The funeral procession would pass through it once, and then it would be sealed forever in darkness. All of that effort, all of that precision, all of that architectural genius created for an audience that would experience it for perhaps an hour at most. The Grand Gallery would then spend eternity in perfect darkness, unchanged and unseen, a masterpiece of engineering that no one would ever witness again. Think about that for a moment. You're building a cathedral-like corridor inside a mountain, featuring sophisticated corbelling and precise stone cutting, and the entire purpose is for a funeral procession to walk through it once before it is sealed forever. It is like creating a spectacular theatrical stage with perfect acoustics and stunning architecture, putting on a single performance for a very small audience, and then burning the theatre down immediately afterward. Except instead of burning it, you are burying it under millions of tons of stone and leaving it there for 45 centuries until someone with explosives and an unhealthy curiosity decides to break in and see what you are hiding. Once the pyramid is complete, the enormous ramps that have snaked around and up the structure must be dismantled. This is a surprisingly complex process, for these ramps contain nearly as much material as some smaller pyramids. The mud brick and rubble are carted away and reused for other construction projects, and slowly, like a sculptor removing clay to reveal the statue within, the true form of the pyramid is exposed. The gleaming white Tura limestone casing stones catch the sunlight, and the pyramid shines like a beacon visible for miles across the desert. For a brief moment in history, before the casing stones are later stripped away by generations of builders looking for pre-cut stone, the Great Pyramid is a geometric marvel of polished white stone, an artificial mountain more perfect than anything nature could create. The dismantling of the ramps must be done carefully and in the correct sequence. You cannot simply start tearing down ramps from the bottom, because the upper sections need the lower sections for support until the work is finished. Instead, the dismantling begins at the top and works downward, the reverse of how the ramps were built. As each section of ramp is removed, the casing stones beneath are revealed, cleaned and polished. The process is painstaking, requiring nearly as much organisation and effort as building the ramps in the first place. Teams of workers fill baskets with the mud, brick and rubble that form the ramp structure, carry these baskets down to ground level, and dump them in designated areas where the material can be sorted and reused. The mud bricks from the ramps are valuable materials. Unlike the limestone blocks of the pyramid itself, which are permanent fixtures, the mud bricks can be reused. They are sorted, damaged bricks are set aside for use as fill material, and intact bricks are stacked for use in other construction projects. Some will be used to build tombs for nobles and officials. Others will be used in the construction of walls, buildings, and infrastructure elsewhere in Egypt. The rubble and sand that form the bulk of the ramp's interior are used as fill material in various construction projects, or simply spread out to build up the level of low-lying areas. As the ramps are progressively removed, the pyramid's true appearance is gradually revealed. The casing stones, which have been visible only on the lowest courses while the ramps existed, now become the pyramid's defining feature. These Tura limestone blocks, cut with precision, and fitted with joints so tight that you cannot insert a knife blade between them, cover the entire surface of the pyramid. Each casing stone has been individually shaped so that its outer surface forms part of a smooth, continuous slope. The effect is spectacular. Instead of the rough stepped appearance of the core blocks, the finished pyramid presents an unbroken, polished surface that reflects sunlight with dazzling intensity. The workers assigned to the final finishing of the casing stones have the delicate task of polishing the limestone to a brilliant shine. They use sand and water as an abrasive, rubbing the stone surface in circular motions until it becomes smooth and reflective. This polishing is done after the ramps are removed, working from the top down, just as the casing stones were placed from the top down. The polishing work is tedious and time-consuming, but the results are stunning. The finished surface is so smooth that, according to later Arab historians, you could barely see the joints between individual stones. From a distance, the pyramid would appear to be carved from a single massive piece of white stone. The removal of the ramps also reveals the pyramid's perfect geometry. The corners, which have been partially obscured by ramps throughout the construction process, are now exposed as perfectly straight vertical lines running from the base to the apex. The four faces, each one a precisely angled triangle, meet at the corners in crisp, clean edges. The alignment with the cardinal directions is evident. The summit, crowned with its capstone, sits at the exact centre of the base square. The mathematical and geometric perfection of the structure is now fully visible. This is what the decades of careful surveying, constant checking and precise stone placement have achieved. A monument to geometry itself. Standing back to view the completed pyramid, you realise you're looking at something unprecedented in human history. This is not just a large building, it is a mathematical solid rendered in stone, a geometric form brought into physical reality on a scale that dwarfs anything else humans have created. The pyramid is a statement in the language of geometry, a declaration that humanity can impose perfect order on the chaos of nature. It is a monument to precision, to planning, to organisation, to the power of collective effort directed toward a single unified goal. But here is where the irony becomes apparent. This moment of perfection, when the pyramid stands complete with its gleaming white casing stones polished to brilliance, will not last forever. Over the centuries, earthquakes will loosen some casing stones. More significantly, later builders, always in need of pre-cut stone for their own projects, will strip away the casing stones, using them for mosques, fortresses, and buildings in Cairo. By the modern era, almost all of the casing stones will be gone, leaving only the rough core blocks visible. The smooth, white, geometrically perfect pyramid that you see today will become the rough, stepped, brown pyramid that tourists will photograph thousands of years from now. Think about that for a moment. You have spent years building ramps, then more years dismantling those same ramps, all to reveal a perfectly smooth white pyramid that will stay perfect for a few centuries before people start taking it apart to build other things. It is like spending decades building a beautiful sculpture, completing it to perfection, having a brief moment to admire it, and then watching as future generations chip away at it for spare parts until only the rough framework remains. Except the rough framework is still 146 metres tall and weighs 6 million tonnes, so even the destroyed version of your masterpiece is still the most impressive thing anyone has ever built, and people will still be arguing about how you did it 45 centuries later. And so our journey through the desert sands of ancient Egypt comes to an end. We have walked in the footsteps of workers who lived over 4,500 years ago, men who woke each morning not knowing if this would be the day a stone would crush them, or a rope would snap, or the heat would finally overcome them. We have felt the weight of copper chisels in our hands, tasted the limestone dust in our mouths, and pulled on ropes until our shoulders burned and our hands bled. We have climbed ramps that rose higher than any structure humanity had ever built, hauling stones that weighed more than elephants, one exhausting step at a time. These were not slaves driven by whips, as Hollywood would have you believe. They were citizens fulfilling their obligation to a god-king, fed well, cared for when injured, organised into teams with names they could take pride in. They were part of something larger than themselves, something that would outlast them by millennia. The work was brutal, yes. The conditions were harsh beyond anything most of us will ever experience. But there was meaning in the struggle, purpose in the effort, and a kind of immortality in the stone. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of your own life. You probably complained today about your internet being slow, or your coffee being lukewarm, or having to sit in traffic. These ancient workers would have thought you were living in paradise beyond imagination. You have hot water that appears instantly at the turn of a tap. You have food that requires no hunting, no farming, no months of preservation in salt. You have machines that move you effortlessly across distances that would have taken them weeks to walk. You have medicine that can cure infections that would have killed them in days. You have shelter that maintains perfect temperature regardless of the weather outside. The pyramid builders worked for decades to create something that would last forever, and they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But they never got to see the finished product from a distance, to appreciate what they had created. They never got to sleep on a mattress, to adjust a thermostat, to order food delivered to their door, to watch the sunset without wondering if tomorrow would bring another stone to haul up another ramp. They lived hard lives in service to a vision they would never fully see realized. So as you lie in your comfortable bed tonight, in your climate-controlled room, with your full stomach and your clean water and your modern medicine nearby, perhaps spare a thought for those ancient workers. They pulled ropes in the desert sun so that a pharaoh could achieve immortality. You inherited a world built on the accumulated efforts of billions of people who came before you, each one solving problems, creating knowledge, building systems, pulling their own metaphorical ropes. The pyramid still stands as a reminder that humans, working together with purpose and patience, can create things that defy time itself. Let the weight of 4,500 years of history settle gently around you like a blanket. Let the image of that gleaming white pyramid catching the first light of dawn over the Nile Valley fill your mind. Let yourself feel grateful for the distance between your life and theirs, for the progress that means you will never have to quarry limestone with copper chisels or drag stones up endless ramps. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the Egyptian desert a geometric mountain of stone still rises from the sand, still perfect in its proportions, still mysterious in its precision, still asking every generation the same question. How did they do it? And now you know. They did it one stone at a time, one day at a time, with copper and rope and sweat and determination. They did it the same way anything truly great gets done, by refusing to quit, by showing up every day, and by pulling together in the same direction. Rest now. Let your modern worries fade away. Tomorrow you can return to your heated coffee and your high-speed internet. But tonight, let yourself drift off, imagining the sound of copper striking limestone, the chant of the overseers marking rhythm for the rope gangs, and the satisfied exhaustion of workers who knew they were building something eternal. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with geometric perfection and impossible ambitions.